Good evening. I'm Milos Stelik, the Director of Facets. I want to welcome you to tonight's teach-in, which is titled, Why Aren't There More Women in Film? And, you know, the concept behind that is very simple because it comes out of a personal irritation because obviously women are grossly underrepresented in cinema. And at the same time, even women filmmakers know so little about what amazing, incredible, brave women did historically to fight against more than glass ceilings and more than we can possibly imagine, to really create a cinema that was different, that was vibrant, that resonates until today. So it's really wonderful to have you here. You know, we exist to do three things, which is to show extraordinary films and extraordinary experiences to extraordinary people, and you are those extraordinary people here tonight.
So only so-so.
You're only so-so? Well, you'll be more extraordinary when you leave here. And extraordinarily proud to have Therese Grisham here, you know, who is co-author of a new book of Ida Lupino. She's taught many classes here. She's an extraordinary, not only an extraordinary historian, but also someone who can really relate film and film history in a very direct and very profound and powerful way. So, but before, her book is here, so if you want to know more about Ida Lupino, welcome to buy it as you exit. Thank you also for those of you who have supported us in our end of the year campaign. We desperately need not only your bodies and your breath and your ideas, but also your money if you have it. So please feel free at any time between now and the end of the year to go to facets.org/donate and give all you can, because our needs are great. I think that we serve an important function. And as Bill Ayers, who started the whole teaching series early this year, said, you know, Facets has been here for 42 years, but don't take it for granted, because very often it is. So what we do and the support that we get is a big, 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 enormous gulf, and we need your help in filling it. Let me introduce Charles Coleman, the director of the Facet Cinematheque, who is going to introduce Therese better than I did, and and be here with her afterwards. So please welcome Charles Coleman.
Thank you, Milos. Yeah, my name is Charles Coleman. I'm the film program director here at Facets, and thanks for supporting independent cinema, and we try to do the best we can to bring the world to your doorstep. It saves a lot on travel costs. And I do want to say that we used to have a pretty robust film school, and a part of the film school was to have an interactive dialogue about film as an art form, because people are used to going to the Museum of Contemporary Art, the Art Institute, maybe the Poetry Foundation, maybe people are part of book clubs, and you want to have this sort of interactive dialogue about something that you've read, you've seen, maybe it's a piece of music. And for some reason, film had fallen by the wayside. It's always that people thought, well, everybody's a film critic, so why do I need to talk to anybody about it? But film is one of those areas that's been around for over 100 years. And like any legacy of that weight, it deserves review, discourse, and we need to meet the challenges that film can offer to us. We just recently had a screening of Sergei Eisenstein's October, 10 Days to Shook the World, 100th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution. And even though people can read about that piece of history, it's also fantastic when you have someone of a prodigious talent that can bring that to you in a visual way, and it opens the door for what I would classify as informed discourse. And then I remember talking to Teresa when I used to call resumes and CVs looking for instructors that would not only have a certain level of expertise, but also be able to communicate that to a spectator or a viewer on an instructional level. without any pretension, opening the door to things that had previously been unseen. One example would be, I know people are sort of fascinated by Greta Gerwig's film Lady Bird, which I can say is actually quite an accomplishment. However, I do think it proves instructive that people should see other filmmakers who happen to be women that deserve to be rediscovered. And that was one of the things that Therese and I had in common. We were discussing Dorothy Arzner, just different filmmakers who are not only women, but also were people who actually had very strong way of expressing themselves despite the male patriarchy and hierarchy that was preventing them from actually realizing their vision. And Ida Lupino is one of those directors. I mean, she actually was an actress in films like High Sierra, with the Raoul Walsh film with Humphrey Bogart, but she always wanted to direct. And she served an apprenticeship by doing things like How the Young Will Travel and TV shows like The Rifleman, and then she graduated to doing feature films. So Teresa taught a class on Ida Lupino here for the film school, and hopefully that class served as the launch point for her book, which I've read, and I can honestly say, you should buy a copy. You know, Schopenhauer once said that talent sees a target that it can hit, genius sees a target that no one ever saw. Teresa's one of those people. So I'd like to welcome her for the teach-in. She will introduce the film, talk something about it. It'll be interactive, Socratic dialogue after the movie. And she will be purchasing or selling her copies, but she will be perfect free to autograph. I'd like to welcome Therese Grisham.
I can tell I have relatives in the audience. Thank you, Charles and Milos. I would like to just briefly introduce Lupino, who was the only woman director in Hollywood. It seems every decade there was only one in Hollywood, from 1949 until 1953. And she moved into television, which was more lucrative, and she had a lot of connections, and she was urged by other friends who were in the television business to do so in 1956. She made over 50 episodes of television shows, and if you want to read more about that, that's the third of our book is devoted to her television work. But her early films were made by her own production company called the Filmmakers at a time when the studio monopolies had been broken up and independent production became the norm. Because production was so expensive, and Hollywood studios became essentially distributors of films. That situation exists today with other sort of caveats, but she took over directing from Elmer, what's his name? Oh my God. Clifton, Elmer Clifton, who had a heart attack about 3 days into shooting a film called Not Wanted, which is about unwanted pregnancy and a single mother. Lupino's focus was on what's called the social problem film. And she's probably unique in Hollywood for concentrating her focus on the social problem film on young women in the post-war period. That is not something typical. And she also combined the social problem film with two kind of unlikely styles, one of which is film noir. In one film, Outrage, about the aftermath of a young woman being raped, it is directly from German Expressionism. And something she really admired sort of Italian neorealist principles. So on location shooting, unknown, she didn't use non-professional actors generally, but unknown actors. She even used her houseman as a composer for the theme of outrage, and using available light, low budget, and so on. And she loved Rossellini and met him and really was inspired by him to continue on her path. So what we have tonight is a film she made in 1951. It's called Hard, Fast, and Beautiful, and in part it's a social problem film about women in sports at a time when what was called shamateurism was prevalent, meaning that amateur, in this case tennis players, were used for commercial purposes. And she concentrates on women in the sport. Some of the footage you'll see is real tennis players playing tennis. But the film is much more than that. It's also it has been called a maternal melodrama, and the mother, the young woman's name is Florence, and her mother is Millie, who's played by Claire Trevor. The daughter is played by Sally Forrest. It's been called a maternal melodrama in that many critics have thought that Millie, the mom, is vilified. But I think we have to, for using her daughter for her own, sort of social climbing, but we have to remember what era this is. It's in the direct post-war period where women were, disencouraged or discouraged from having ambition outside of the home, and you can see that actually in the home itself as it's constructed in the film, where Millie, in order to conduct her business and exercise her ambition, has to take over a table in the living room because she doesn't have a place, for an office. Florence, on the other hand, also takes over the typically male space for the time, practicing tennis on the garage door, which is that's a male domain. And there are some really interesting other things about the film, and particularly in its production design and its mise en scène, where we have the headboards of Millie and her husband Will, whose name is ironic in the film, and we could talk about that later, that face each other. So they're not side by side, not even as two single beds. They're actually facing, the headboards are facing each other. So that's an unusual arrangement, and it's very meaningful in the film. And so I am bringing these things up, sort of to highlight them for you so you can look for them and see what you think. But ultimately, well, I won't talk about the ending of the film now. You need to see the film, and then we'll talk about what is the nature of this ending. So, I believe I've introduced the film pretty thoroughly, and it's only 78 minutes long, and afterwards we'll have a Q&A discussion, and then I guess if you're interested, we have a book signing. I just want to let you know that the book is 25% off for you exclusively, and I will also sign it. Okay.
I'd like to reintroduce the woman you've already met, Therese Grisham.
Thank you. What did you think?
Very good.
What do you think of the idea that if we look at the film in the context of the post-war period, what we have is sort of like a taboo or a prohibition on women exercising their ambition if they want to be upwardly mobile, have careers, sort of giving the lie to the the resurgence of the American dream in this period after the war, that everyone can aspire to material happiness, upward mobility, and so on, in order to have a spiritual life. I mean, that is sort of what's written about the American dream. So here we have two women who are aspiring to have that American dream in two very different ways. And I wonder what you think. Do you think Millie is a villain? Go ahead. Yes.
Hi, Therese.
Hi.
So I don't think she's as bad as a pageant mom. I've seen worse. I think that she had some regrets in her own life and her own marriage, and she didn't want that for her daughter. And so, yes, she should have been a little bit more honest with her daughter about the money, but I think that when you have like a younger child, sometimes you think they'll piss away an opportunity. And so she thought, okay, well, this is the only way that I can assure that she is able to do these things. There was a little bit of selfishness too, because she got to go along and she got to live vicariously through her daughter. But I don't think that she was that much of a villain. I think she really was proud of her and she did want to see her succeed. So.
Yeah, good. Other people, yes.
Well, we just saw Battle of the Sexes.
Oh, yeah.
So that's 20 years later, and women aren't doing too much better in that world. And so we see how the tennis pro Billie Jean King realizes she's getting ripped off, and she does something about it. But it seems like a much more innocent time in that world, where, for all we know, everyone's working for free. I don't know. Money is not even discussed, it seems. And so it's sort of a dirty subject, which makes me wonder, like, what are the guys doing on the other side of the court? It feels like, looking back with all these years, they were very naive, and I don't fault anybody. Make some money, get as far as you can.
Okay.
The guys are doing it.
Yes. Good. Yes.
Well, they're both, Millie and Florence, they're just different sides of the same patriarchal roles. Millie is further along, the husband hasn't worked out, so it's the child. Okay, Flo is choosing, she's the good girl, she's choosing the hubby and hoping her bet comes out better, but they're still totally circumscribed by women's roles. And
So,
I
in
think
other
your point about after World War II, Rosie the Riveter is back out of work.
Right.
So your choices are the family, one way or the other.
Right. So, sort of shuttling between marriage.
Husband, child, how am I gonna be in the world, have an impact in the world? It's not as me, as
Yeah.
a person, it's through my husband or my child or children, and that's the patriarchal roles that women are supposed to.
Yeah, I think that's a really good comment. Millie kind of lives her ambitions through Florence. Florence is her proxy, right? Because she has there is no other choice for her.
She's busy sewing, she's doing all this stuff, but it's all the family.
Well, the idea of her having an actual career, I mean, in that regard, maybe she's a little like the femme fatale in film noir, the idea of having a career outside of a relationship is absolutely, she would be a total pariah then, right? And she has an ambitious daughter. I mean, they're both extremely ambitious and competitive, right? That's a good comment. Yes?
I was a little foggy on the pure ethics of what they were doing. I mean, was that just absolutely forbidden or in a gray area? You had referenced
no,
the shaman tours. I'm not familiar with that whole thing, but I guess.
Okay, I'm not familiar really with the history of tennis, but I do know that later on there were some provisions made about that. But at this time, you weren't allowed to accept any monetary gifts or put your name on anything, or that was a violation of of the amateurism of the sport. So Fletcher Locke is, the conniving capitalist, right, an exploiter in the film.
I think this was the same year as Hitchcock's Stranger on a Train, which also has tennis at its center. I love that movie, but I think the tennis scenes in this movie were much more action-packed and suspenseful than...
That's interesting. Did you notice the cameo by Lupino and Robert Ryan?
Yeah,
Clapping in the audience? Yes.
Yeah, I was gonna say something about Stranger on a Train too. I felt like tennis functions in a similar way in this film as it does in Strangers on a Train. Like it seems to underscore or highlight the dichotomous nature of the film's main characters' personalities. And that like Millie and Florence, they seem so opposite. Like Florence is so innocent seeming, and she seems so appalled at first by her mother's behavior, but she's able to adapt pretty quickly and easily, like surprisingly easily.
Because she has that drive and that ambition too.
Yeah.
To something they share. There's a great turn in the film, the turning point when Florence becomes really cynical. It's sort of that romantic idea of the fall from innocence and idealism into cynicism, which occurs in many film noirs too. Yeah, in the back, you had your hand up before.
Are we to assume that in that time frame from her turning point, it's been a full year and we just go past that because she goes back to the tournament to defend her title? Would a whole year have gone by? So is she in that state for a full year?
No, I think if she...
It wouldn't make any sense because she came back to defend her title. It happened yearly.
Yeah,
So
that's
the whole
true.
progression of seeing the boyfriend come back after not being in the picture for 9 to 10 months, and the entire time are we to believe that she's had that, as you said, the drive and ambition that came forth after that drunken night of cynicism, and she understands that this is her position now, or are we just, I'm just wondering about the timeline there.
Can somebody respond to that, because I'm not sure.
I was gonna say that the timeline throughout, even at the beginning where, like, it's winter, Locke comes and says, well, you're gonna challenge for the tournament next summer, and then instantly she's having the heartfelt discussion with her dad, I mean, that was in the winter, so it's like, I think the movie plays fast and loose with the kind of,
Well, there is a montage sequence that indicates the passage of time.
78 minutes, for God's sake.
Pardon?
It's a leap of faith. I mean,
Right.
it's the movies.
I was also just because I just looked it up, that until 1968, at least the U.S. Open and Wimbledon and I think all the Grand Slam tournaments were amateur only.
Right.
So this gentleman's certainly the instant thought is, how are women being shortchanged compared to men? But even the great men of that era were not allowed to earn a living playing tennis. And so the film, I almost see the film as almost ahead of its time. Some of the discussions are talked about, the college football players and basketball players get these huge filled arenas and bowl games, and theoretically, they're getting scholarships, but they're not. And so I thought that was an interesting thing about, that it wasn't even just contrasting women and men, it was contrasting why are these athletes, playing in these huge filled stadiums not able to make a living. I think that's a question that certainly is relevant today, probably wasn't what Ida Lupino was thinking of foremost at the time, but I find that an interesting kind of way that it's resonant today.
Interesting. Yes.
From about 1930 until 1968, there were professional tours. Jack Kramer, Don Budge, even Bill Tilden from the 1920s, who had been an amateur but turned pro. And Bobby Riggs was also involved with that.
Yeah.
But they did not make they didn't make a lot of money. As the gentleman up here said earlier, the open tennis began in 1968, which allowed all of the best players to play in all of the tournaments. I think the film shows the shamateurism was involved with the promoter,
Right,
with the
Fletcher
promoter,
Locke, the coach
setting
and
up the
promoter.
European tour and setting up the deal with the hotel chain
Yes.
and all of that.
Absolutely.
Prior to 1968, a lot of the top amateurs were taking under the table
Yes.
money, and that was.
And that's exactly what this shows. And also the plan for Florence to turn pro, you know, when they're in Europe and he's had this cheap tennis racket produced, right? So it's all in the plan. Yes.
I'm just sitting here wondering how the marriage worked out.
Which one?
Well, when Florence marries her boyfriend,
Yeah.
is she going to turn into another Millie?
You gotta see the sequel.
Well, you know, that's a very good question,
Yeah,
because all we've seen in the film is a desperately unhappy marriage, you know, and is that going to be her refuge? Will it save her, or will it be?
Is she so ambitious at some level
Yeah,
that she'll have a different kind of ambition and also be trapped? It's sort of interesting to think if there's a transformation for her out of a typical woman's role at the time, or if this is basically beating a retreat.
well, I think the ending is really ambiguous in that way,
Sure.
and I think everything leads, for me, to the fact that her marriage is not going to be a sanctuary, you know. She is very much like Millie, and she will become a Millie. Who has a, Grace, yeah.
So I'm curious about people's thoughts on the two men, Bill and Gordon, and how they are in relation to the women that they love. I have a lot of thoughts, and they're not quite concrete, but Bill is certainly a likable character.
Will,
We're certainly
yeah.
supposed to see him in a favorable light because he's hurt by the love that Millie doesn't give him. But you said, when you mentioned putting things into context, I can't help but like kind of think a little further into why Millie became so hardened towards men, or towards him, or men in general, or him and his lack of economic success and drive, and what and kind of like what the dynamics of that, and how it may not be all her fault that the marriage soured, of course, and so
I think that's definitely,
don't see any of that.
yes.
Portrayed in that light, and Gordon, completely, I mean, really just using Florence's affection to control her, it seems like, and just say, well, it's my way or the highway. Yet also aren't meant to see him as any kind of villain either. She loves him, she ends up with him. So, but these two men, essentially, you know, like, I don't know, I have thoughts.
Well, Will seems to be exceedingly passive, and to become more so in the film until the end when he says, "Beat it, Millie," you know. But he only stands up to her on his deathbed, right?
And take all that standing.
So, you know, if you remember some of the shots with Will standing in behind Fletcher Locke and Millie, you know, and Millie's looking off, she has her dreams, you know, and Fletcher is like this, and you see Will standing behind them, sort of looking concerned. There are a number of shots that are similar to that, where he appears to be kind of the moral voice of the film, and yet look at the other side of that, his utter and complete passivity in all ways, in material, but also, you know, emotional ways, right? Yes?
Well, Flo was getting hard like the mother, and then when the father died, she showed she was a good person, a nice person, and then it gave her the emotional support to win one for the Gipper, so she won. Because there was a question if she could beat this.
Yeah, what she says though is, you know, I had to, and that's again, a very ambiguous statement, isn't it? Sort of like, why did she have to? Did she have to do it because of her own competitive drive? Did she have to do it because she's in this exploitative relationship that she's living out to the end, or why? You know? Yes.
There's something popped in my head about the nature of traditional male-female roles are in a way shuffled in strange sort of ways. That the mother figure is less of a nurturer and more of like this assertion of control. Like that's the had she had a career path other than controlling mother, she could have been a very effective power player, executive type.
Yes, I think that's a really good point. And that's also true of the femme fatale in film noir. That, you know, if she had had an outlet for her ambition, you know, she might have been only as sociopathic as most CEOs.
Right, so in some ways, like, what are considered positive male attributes
yes,
are
exactly.
woven into this female character, but there's nowhere for them to go except for the traditionally accepted manner of controlling one's children.
Right.
But I wanted to ask you to that, and to other ripples of that kind of question. What? How do we know anything about Ida Lupino's approach to that script, which if I recall, was written by men? Did she adapt?
Well, it's written by her.
What was her relationship to that script? Was she able to?
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, it was okay.
What did she do to bring life to those questions?
It was her production company, first of all. She and Collier Young, who was her former husband, and Malvin Wald, who was a writer, the three of them formed the filmmakers. And Lupino, you know, this sort of goes contrary to most auteur theory from, you know, originally from France, you know, worked in all of those roles and collaborated with everyone. So she wrote, she produced, and she directed. So if we try to separate her individual perspective, I think is what you're saying, from this collaboration, I'm a little loath to do that because they were so mutually involved, you know. It gives us a different model of what an auteur is. It's a collaborative model. And I do know, you know, Lupino was quite focused on the problems that young women had in different parts of life after World War II. And she would have, if you see her other movies, you know, she certainly would have seen Millie as an overreacher, but not to be vilified. She's vilified by a different voice in the film, and that would be sort of Will's perspective. Right? I mean, because she's also a sympathetic character, and she changes over time. She's corrupted also by this exploitative capitalist.
And she pays the price.
And she ends up paying the price, and that's a tragic shot at the end of the film, you know? It's almost like the end of a horror movie, you know, and there's all just detritus. And, you know, yes, Mike.
I wanted just a couple things. We were knowing, a woman wrote the screenplay, but I noted when it came up, it was written by the book. It was based on a book written by this guy John Artunis.
Yes, right? Which is much earlier.
Right. So John Artunis, when I was a kid, I read, and they were really old then. But he wrote. You mentioned The Kid from Tompkinsville. I never read that, but I read one called High Pockets, and he would write these novels for, you know, mostly for boys. At least that was the intended audience.
I was
right?
confused.
I know that, but I'm guessing.
Yeah.
But so, like in High Pockets, it's a story of a guy, he's playing baseball and he gets a big hit. He's the big star, right? But then and he gets cynical and all that stuff. And at the end, of course, he realizes that it's a team game, and, you know, he becomes one of the guys and he sacrifices his batting average to win the pennant, that kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I don't know what was done with the screenplay, but I'm thinking in the original story, there might have been some of that kind of message for Florence, right? She goes through the cynicism, and then she comes, and at the end, she's gonna marry, you know, Mr. Right.
Yeah, which is sort of awful, isn't it?
Right, but what I wanted to say, no, I agree, but what I wanted to say was, so we can read certain perspectives in, you know, from 2017, And I'm thinking that maybe Ida Lupino put some subversive things in this movie
Oh, yes.
for us in 2017. But I'm guessing that in 1951, it was read pretty much as a straightforward, that terrible Millie
Well,
and that terrible Florence.
You know, I think there's a lot of people, well, pretty much everybody thinks this, that back then they had a different perspective than we do now. You know, we're more savvy, we've had more history, we've seen more movies, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But as we find out, you know, there are a lot of studies about audiences of the time, audience reception. As we find out, that's not necessarily true. You know, subtexts were read quite as much as we do today. And, for example, that great shot in Bringing Up Baby with Cary Grant in the negligee, and he comes out and he goes, "I feel so gay."
Right.
I mean,
People got it.
yeah, they got it. So, you know, because that's an old term, and if you were in a subculture that would understand that, you would certainly see it, you know. So I don't really agree with the argument that we're more savvy today. I think we think we are, you know.
But do you think the message of the film that most people took at the time was sympathetic towards Millie and Florence?
You know, it really wildly varies, and there have been feminist critics later, but feminist critics who don't like this film because they think it, or they say it's a, you know, a typical maternal melodrama in which the mother, sort of like Mildred Pierce, you know, where the mother is vilified and punished and so on. But, you know, we are free to read it differently, and I think Lupino was. This is how she made film noir. You know, she was especially about women, but also about men. If you watch The Bigamist, you know, you see the predicament of men as well, about gender trauma in the post-war period. That was really her focus. And so any subversive meaning, as you say, that we can find in that film is probably there, really, like that
No,
she
I
put there
I
as a
believe-
subtext.
Right,
You know?
I know she's very on it.
I would say
She had to
it
do
was
that
sufficiently
way.
nuanced that it could be read in a number of ways, and I think Millie
Yes,
was a complicated character. But I think there was also, gender politics aside, there was maybe a message of, which might be very subversive at the time, is just attacking American ambition and greed for more.
And, well, and the capitalistic
capitalism and-
aspect of the American dream, you know, the exploitative aspect. Like it's not just that people can't realize the American dream. There's something corrupt about the American dream. That is a frequent message also in film noir. So that's why I think of this as a film noir.
Millie had a lot already, and she was not content. I mean, she a husband and a nice home and all that, but that was not enough. So.
But yeah, you're supposed to be upwardly mobile. You know, that's part of the dream.
Even if you have to sell your soul to do it.
Is that right? Yeah. Go ahead. Yes.
Well, I didn't see Millie as being evil. I see the thing about capitalism. Look what she wants. She wants a bigger house. She wants a new car. She has no way to get it on her own.
Right.
She talks about how she lived in some, you know, smaller house, and she was hoping her life would be different. And it is post-war, and she isn't Rosie the Riveter.
And it's all at the expense of her soul, as you're also saying,
Yeah, I mean,
right?
she
Yeah.
reminds me of people in my neighborhood when I was growing up.
Yeah.
You know, and she sees her path out of this, what she perceives as her miserable, stuck life, is through her daughter. And the daughter.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so she exploits her daughter, but I didn't think it was malicious.
No, I don't think so either. I think Millie is at many points of the film, a very sympathetic character, actually.
Yeah.
Let's see, who had their hand up before? I can't, go ahead back there.
Well, we just saw Lady Bird. So now it's 60 years later or whatever, and another female director comes out, you know, there's been a long time without a drink here. And so people are talking about, as you started with your remarks, about the role of women in cinema. Can you comment about the contrast between the two films? Because you have a strong mom played by Laurie Metcalf in Lady Bird, and a very passive father played by Tracy Letts. So,
You know what, I personally cannot comment because I haven't seen Lady Bird. So, but maybe somebody else wants to address that. Go ahead.
No, not the Lady Bird, but I thought there was another competition going on between Will and Millie for Flo's allegiance. And I thought he told Millie to take a hike when it was clear that he won Flo. That he had, and that was part of the good girl, bad woman, which is also really common in film noir and in that era.
Yeah.
That the too ambitious woman ends alone, and she goes back not only to whatever the boyfriend's name was, but Gordon and Daddy, and then Daddy's like, take a hike.
Okay, that's a great point. Yes.
Well, I felt like both women were punished at the end,
Yes.
which made
They
me
were.
uncomfortable. Because Millie, her situation, but I found Gordon, it made me controlling and petty and uncompromising. There was a scene where he's literally pulling her along, which is somewhat abusive, like he's dragging her, jerking her by the arm.
Good observation. I agree completely.
I mean, what a putz. I mean, this is, I just,
You should write movie reviews. We need more women critics.
You had different perspective from but maybe you're right. Maybe in the, like when it came out, there were women in the audience who also cringed and said he's a putz.
Well, he was very broadly drawn in that direction, I thought. Very clearly a putz.
Yeah, it's just, and she had to give up. Like I said, both are punished because, she can't have a career, but to get the man.
In a way, it's sort of an American tragedy in that regard. Yeah. What did you think of the headboards, by the way?
Oh,
aren't they wonderful? It's really sort of the literalization of Will and Millie going head to head, and who's going to win this battle, and every approach that Will makes, because it's also a sexual scene, is rebuffed, by those sharp, shiny nails.
Rather than going head to head, I saw that as symbolizing that they were going in different directions.
Well, also that, yeah. Go ahead, back there.
To get back to the women at the very end of the movie, I think that Florence was heartbroken to be dragged away from her mother and that they will reconcile.
You could see.
I think she totally loves her mother.
With the expression on her face in the close-ups at the end, that she's speechless, but her face is crumpling and soft and sad. Yes. Esther, you wanted to say something.
I was obsessively thinking about the headboards the whole time. And I had, it could be completely off, but to me, they were the net.
They were what?
It looks just like the tennis net. And you see the headboards, and then you see the net. And then there's even a shot of Florence shot from below where the net takes up the whole screen. It looks like she's in a cage. So I went from the headboards to the different versions of this net.
Even, did you want to say more?
I also wanted to say I was so happy that this person sitting in front of me said this bit about Gordon, because I found him to be so suffocating. And really, and what happened to me with Millie is in the point at which they're in like the locker room, Millie's packing, and she says, you're too young, think about waiting a year, go back to, I thought she went from villain to hero right there, because I thought she was protecting her kid from the suffocation.
Yeah.
But anyway,
sort of the European treatment.
He didn't necessarily fully agree with my opinion, but.
Yeah, back to the headboard and the tennis net. There are many images like that in the film. When Florence first meets Gordon, for example, they meet over a pointy picket fence, right? And they originally are competitors, and so many images like that establish this competitive sort of wars, It's a little bit, if you were to transform this into a screwball comedy, it would end very differently, but the gender wars, are similar. It's just that nobody ends up understanding anyone else, and nobody ends up happy, and it's, Grace.
So I thought Florence's kind of transformation was really interesting. And speaking of the shots, in the beginning at home in California, there's so many shots to diminish her. Not only the fence between her and Gordon when they first meet, but you see how short she is and how much taller they make him look, even though I don't think that's a correct, an actual correct visualization of their height. She's literally this giant sunflowers in her face. And then one of the most interesting shots I thought was in the living room when Locke comes to their home. She's sitting on the couch and there's this shot where barely her chin is above the back of the couch. And Locke is offering her this opportunity of a lifetime, and she's so deferential to her mother. She doesn't have an emotion until she's like, well, what do you think, Mom? And her mom approves, and then she's really happy.
Mm-hmm.
But that couch shot to me was particularly like, it like cut off, it was like she didn't have any agency. And,
right,
and, then
and what
you
she
see,
doesn't, right.
Exactly, which
Yeah.
exactly is displayed there. And,
Yeah.
and then her power grows, and then she realizes what the manipulation of her mom, that her mother does to her, and she goes wild. I mean, the transformation is overnight. Her trying to kind of, this snappy control is like really exaggerated and quite like night and day. And then in the end, especially after her father's sick, her hero, the man she loves, she's can barely lift her arm in the middle of the match, and she
yes.
almost collapses. And it's this very interesting journey that this character goes on, and it's like she doesn't know who she is.
I think she's probably one of the most unhappy characters in Lupino's films. She probably is the most unhappy. Yeah. Yes.
Well, I like the psychology and the sports training that shows how to become a champion. She became a champion.
Mm-hmm. Clearly, Lupino was very interested in tennis. You know, you can tell that she knows her stuff. Yes.
So, I'm going to dare say something good about Gordon.
Okay.
I mean, sure, it was a very stereotypical boyfriend, girlfriend, I want you to marry me stuff. But in some ways, he's an ethical character in this.
Well, right, I mean...
He talks about when she takes that $50, that it was dirty. I mean, he really talks about, he's concerned about the fact that she's breaking the amateur rules as well. And I know he sort of drags her around, but, you know, there's a lot of things he doesn't do for her own advantage. He doesn't get her pregnant, you know, he doesn't, in some ways, you know, he lets her go. He sets his own sort of boundaries, and yes, he's really controlling, like you expect a guy that age to be at that time, or men in general to be. But anyway, there's if you take him out of his role, in terms of this whole exploitive thing, he's all over it. And remember, his uncle runs the country club and is on him and oppressing him on the phone from the beginning. So he kind of knows about these systems where people with power take advantage.
Yeah, I think both the father and Gordon are sort of, again, the moral voices or the moral looks of the film, but that's mediated, you know, first of all by Will's utter passivity, and second of all by Gordon's violence, his control and violence. So it's not a yes or no or black or white thing, but these characters become very ambiguous, you know. Does somebody want to say?
Oh, I was going to
yes.
say in response to that, because before that comment, I was a little bit more on the side of Gordon.
Mm-hmm.
But then I realized, well, the other side to that is eventually it does become a professional paid sport. And so had the protagonist been a male, then maybe he would have been encouraged to continue playing. Right? But because she's a woman, no, like, you don't want to kind of cross it.
No, she's going to be a wife. She'll be a wife with kids and focus on the domestic sphere. Yes. You wanted to say?
No, I just wanted to say that to me it's a very dark ending.
And it ends with two men, each one grabbing a woman. The daughter is grabbed by Gordon. Yeah, Gordon might be shocked by money, but yet he's taking his prize. And the other guy is grabbing the other woman, the other player.
Exactly.
And
She's
that's
the
end,
tennis
and
ball,
the other is
right?
alone.
She's the tennis ball.
And they are like products, to me,
They're
that's
the
what I
rackets.
felt. And the mother is left alone, now she's too old anyway, she doesn't interest anyone, she doesn't even have a daughter anymore. So it's, to me, it's really super dark.
It is. That's a great comment. I totally agree. I don't know. I don't think we have time for more comments. But, you know, I did want to mention in the hotel room in Europe, that beautiful noir, the noir shadows on the wall that sort of indicate Millie's anxiety and angst, you know. And in one shot where Fletcher is trying to teach Florence how to do a backhand inside, there's a great shadow of her looking like, you know, this unconscious, non-decorous notion of like just bashing him in the head with a tennis racket, which is a shadow on the wall, right? There are many things like that that give a subtext a real body in the film. So anyway, thank you for coming.